Okay, hello everybody. January 20th, 21st, 2020. Doc Hydra here. I've got Chris FRANEK with me on the phone again. And tonight we're going to be talking about foam and batch mixing and cavitation and certain problems and hopefully how to avoid it. So, Chris, how are you tonight?
I'm very good, Joe. How are you doing?
Pretty good. It was kind of touch and go this last week or so trying to get you on the phone. It seemed like every time we wanted to do it, something was popping up.
Yeah, we ended up having a wind event out east here, and I came down with a crud, so I just couldn't get a hold of you with everything going on. So.
Well, I don't blame you for that. In a way, I kind of like put egg on my face myself because I was like, hey, tonight we're gonna have the interview with Jersey, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm sure other people have had it happen to them before.
Oh yeah. So listen, let's why don't you go ahead and tonight you just kind of like take it and tell me what happened, what events. You don't have to give names because I mean that's not what we're about or trying to do here. But in researching this myself and making sure that I was on the right path with what you wanted to do, I don't necessarily see any fault of anybody here. But I think it was basically just something that's like, hey, you know what? Who would have thought? That type of a thing. So why don't you go ahead and tell me the apparatus, what was going on, and what happened as best as you know.
All right. So in my fire career, and I witnessed it both, as a frontline firefighter and it was running engines with some of my folks. The first case was a tender engine or a tanker pumper, whatever as they call them on the East Coast here. And this was probably the early 2000s, and it was a large barn fire, and they decided to use Class A foam. And I don't know if you remember back in the early 2000s, again, foam was, people started getting excited about it again, and the wet water and things like that. So,
yep.
East Coast here, we got lots of it. So, the engineer at the time, when they were running the shuttles, he decided to batch mix Class A foam into his tender engine.
Okay.
And again, I'm sure you'll go into this more detail later, but he took the 5-gallon jug, and he had about 2,000 gallons, and he dumped almost the whole bottle into the tank. Drove to the fire from the draft site to the fire incident, and then hooked into the line. Now he started suppressing the fire and supplying water, and then I want to say it was about I want to say 15, 20, 25 minutes into the incident. All of a sudden, he started having a lot of trouble with the pump, and he didn't know what was going on. And then he opened one of the valves on the discharges on the side, and steam came blowing out, followed by the best way I can describe it is hot shaving cream. And he lost prime, and everything went high wire. All the gauges went off, and he ended up cavitating the pump. So that was on that incident, and then that was off of a WATEROUS pump, CS model from about 1996, and they figured it probably was all the air in the lines from the foam going, and that was the guess there. It took quite a while to get the apparatus repaired after that, and so that was the first instance. The second instance I witnessed back in the early 2013-14 time frame. I had an engineer on a Type 6 engine, again, batch mixed it because he saw a 5-gallon can of foam, poured it into his 250-gallon tank, about most of the container, and decided to go suppress wildland fire. And he started doing we didn't have a decent water supply that day, and so he dropped a portable pump, was shuttling water back and forth from the pump site to the incident because of just where we were. We had a limited water supply.
Mm-hmm.
And he started noticing he was losing pressure and prime. And, again, the same thing happened. What he discovered was he was filling the tank, but he was only filling it up to the point where just a little bit of foam suds would come out. He wasn't really filling the tank. So every time he would go back to fill the draft site, he would run through water that much quicker. And then the last time, I think it was on a 6-shuttle run he did. So this was over about an hour's time. All of a sudden, same thing. A little bit, wasn't as heavy as the one that came out of the type, the shaving cream, but darn close to it. And again, came out of the overflow valves, came out, actually blew out the drain on the bottom of the pump.
Sure.
And shot the pump to hell. So, and that was a hail pump. Basically it was a modified portable pump put on a Type 6, and that shot that pump to hell.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, when you first mentioned before we were getting ready for tonight, and you were telling me about it, I wasn't thinking too much of it. But when you were telling me that he batch mixed 5 gallons to 250 gallon tank or whatever, I was like, oh my God. That's
again,
that's a lot of
to
foam.
your listeners out there, Doc Hydro, it was foam is an art that a lot of people, if they're not familiar with it, they think, just a little bit more will help out, and not realizing that a little bit goes a long way.
So, with that, based upon the 2 incidences that you're talking about, in both cases, on the 2,000 gallon pumper tender, and especially on the portable pump, the modified portable pump, and that reservoir, both of those are like way over batch mixed, which in itself really isn't that big of a problem until you start trying to pull to capacity and you start agitating, because you got a mechanical agitation going on inside the pump chamber. So here's one of the things that I want to do right off the bat is, let's think about this. So let me ask you, based upon what you're taught out there in your neck of the woods on the East Coast in the structural world, what do they describe, and you can paraphrase, Jersey, what do they describe as cavitation? What is it?
For us, it's cavitation is when you're getting some form of airflow in the pump causing you to lose prime and pressure, or you're building up pressure in the pump, and you could cause it to fail, and actually physically fail.
Right, through the discharge side, because you got suction cavitation, discharge cavitation. Okay, so let me read you, and this goes back, and for the folks that are going to be watching this video online, let me read you from one of the guys who is like my second mentor, Lawrence Irvin. Started and is credited with creating the first fire science curriculum in the United States right around the time of, I want to say, 1955 to 1959. Before that, he was a firefighter in the United States Army, and he'd served a tour there. But he lists as the definition of cavitation is a condition in which air cavities are formed in a pump, resulting in vibration, loss of efficiency, and possible damage to the pump. Now, he's got a period there, but if I continue on to the next line, he further writes, it occurs chiefly in areas of high vacuum and may be referred to as a pump is running away from water. And he's got that in quotes. The impeller may move faster than the water can move at the existing input pressure, and water vapor may be released from the water due to low vapor pressure. So, now, obviously, he's got several aspects there. So the number one thing that he talked about, if we think about this, let's go back to the foam. When we mix Class A foam into a water solution, okay, or into water, then we create a solution that we want to use on Class A fuels. So when we do that, what essentially are we introducing in the water stream? Air bubbles.
Yeah, that's how you're getting the foam action going.
Right. So, by doing that and then having this thing come down through the waterway from the tank into the impeller. So, now that we've got that definition, let's go to where I was going to go next. So, we got our tank, and then we got our pump, and then we've got our plumbing. Now, on my Type 2 support tender, I've got 2 tank to pump valves, but I've got a 500 gallon per minute pump on my tender. Now, this pumper tender that you're talking about and looking it up, the CS20, which is a 1250 GPM pump, single stage. I assume this was a single stage pump, right?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so based upon that and from what we had talked about earlier, you believe that the supply line from the tank to the eye of the impeller is between 3.5 and 4 inches in diameter, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so now, from what I understand about that, in order to move 1,250 gallons a minute through a line, you need something bigger than a 4-inch diameter line. So let's think about this a minute. We've got our foam solution going into the tank. Okay. Right now, the fact that he added 5 gallons to 2,000 gallons, and that's overmixed in the ratio, it's about a 2.5% ratio now. That's not that critical of a deal just yet, from my understanding. So the problem now is going to come to where when we engage this pump and we open the tank to pump valve, because we've got a small line and the pump is naturally going to want to pull to capacity, especially when you start throttling up, we're creating greater and greater vacuum. Now, if there's any disturbances, or what in engineering they call protuberances, which can be protrusions in a waterway that can create a breakup of the laminar flow, it creates turbulence. Well, if that turbulence is significant enough, it can start agitating the water solution mix in the suction tube from the tank to the pump. And so therefore, you're already going to start to introduce bubbles before it even hits the low pressure side of the impeller. Now, if we go forward with this to the next one, is that, because he says it occurs chiefly in areas of high vacuum and may be referred to as a pump running away from water. So we've introduced a solution that makes it extremely easy to produce bubbles. That's the purpose of foam, to create the bubbles. So now we've got that. We're lowering the vapor pressure by trying to pull all this water through a small tube, and thereby we're lowering the vapor pressure. And when we do that, we increase the potential for cavitation even more. Not to mention the fact that if we overmix the amount of solution into the water, in other words, increasing the percentage rate, then it goes into the pump chamber, and now it's even agitated further. So basically, it's just expanding and choking on itself, and there's not enough pressure from the water in the tank to force it down through the tube. Eventually, I think it'll probably just start to displace itself. And it sounds to me like that's largely what was going on with that. Now, based upon what I just read to you and described in my theory, I had to pick up the phone and call my mentor today and ran it past him, and he pretty much told me, he said, well, that's spot on, and that's one of the biggest reasons why they're in their department back in his day, they got rid of batch mixing altogether and went with the foam eductors. Now, you know about foam eductors. You've used them quite a bit. My tender doesn't have a foam eductor. But eductors can be temperamental. But it's a surefire way to make sure that you don't end up cavitating on the foam itself.
Again, my introduction with foam itself was, that was like early 2000s, and foam was a big thing, especially on the East Coast at the time, because we were all worried about, the CBNC, WMD, tax. So if we had a hazmat and we need to cover things, we need to know about foam. So a lot of folks that went to these post 9/11 classes were told foam on any major disaster site, and it kind of transferred into the fire world. And again, at the time, they were focusing on Class B foam, not Class A.
Okay.
So that was kind of some issues there. And again, for the folks listening, and as you know, Joe, like you said, it's easy to make bubbles, but the reason we throw foam in, when we're doing wildland suppression, again, from a Type 6 engineer to the ones out there, is like we're worried about water conservation, especially when you only got 250 gallons, you got to stretch it. So it almost increases your penetration capacity. It's what's the word? It reduces the water tension.
Yep.
So if you had one of those water spiders on the surface of the water, folks, it would. If you put a little bit of that 1% Class A solution in there, the water spider could no longer walk on the water. It makes it better so that it reduces the surface tension of the water, so it could penetrate the Class A fuel that much better and extinguish it. And I think it extinguishes like an extra 200% for every one drop. It would actually put out 200 units of whatever's burning. So that's why the main purpose we use Class A foam in the Wildland world. Now, again, I'm going back, years ago, and it's, again, a lost art. We used to have, 2 weekend-long foam classes, and how folks can do it, and how to use inductors. And unfortunately, it's something that we kind of got away from, at least on the East Coast. There's 2 styles of foam inductors that I see now. One is the foam purse, I call them. It's a little tiny yellow bag or green bag that's connected to by a 1 3/4 or 1.5 inch hose, and then you can have different aspiration valves and put different foam mixtures in it.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so a lot of structure companies around my parts have one, and we're still trying to get them educated on that, because there's 3 different aspiration valves. And one's for the the big rave party foam, and then there's a little one for the Class A fires that we would normally see in Wildland. And nobody ever uses the little one. It always frustrates me, because I think that the more foam you get, the better off you are.
Well, and that's also the same train of thought, Jersey, that people have with, more is better on everything. It's like, more RPM, more throttle, more pressure. And it's so funny to me, because when I start teaching people about, well, you want to do, hydraulics is even critical with regard to foam, because now you have to take into account and know the properties of water. So let's continue this a little bit on the properties of water and foam, because for example, if we talk about water itself has a viscosity level that they rate as 0.009. I think it's called poise, P-O-I-S-E. Well, that can be attributed, or there's an equivalent rating to that in pound-foot per second, okay? It's a pressure rating, okay? Now, if we look at let me see if I can pull it up here, which I don't have with me, from Ansel, okay, Ansel.com, they talk about the viscosity. Now, the thing with what's interesting about this is that when we add a foam solution to water, we're lowering the viscosity quite a bit. So to give you an idea of that, and again, for people that are interested, you look here on the sheet, you'll see that the viscosity of a 5-gallon jug of Silvex Class A foam is 12 plus or minus 3 centistokes. Now, to give you a comparison, as they show here, the viscosity of 10W40 motor oil is 160 centistokes. And we all know that 1040 oil is a pretty heavy oil, okay?
Yeah.
So think about this. 160 on the 1040, but 12 plus or minus 3 on the foam. So when we add that to the water, we just made it so super slippery inside that pump chamber, especially if we've got a really high concentration of it, and we're cranking the pressure up and everything else, and we don't have good initial flow to start with. All we're going to do is do like what you said, Jersey, and just turn this into shaving cream. And then burn up a pump. Now they also have the surface tension of water itself is between 66 and 76 dynes per centimeter. Now, a 0.1% solution of Silvex drops that to 27.2. So right off the bat, it's like 40 something dyne per centimeter decrease. Now, if you go to 1% solution, it drops that to 26.6. Okay, so to go from 0.6 to 1% solution, it's only about a 0.2 dynes per centimeter difference. Okay, in terms of the surface tension of the water. But again, fresh water is between 66 and 76 dynes per centimeter. A 0.1% solution is 27.2. So that's a radical drop when you add that into it. And then also you can figure out how much foam to add to a tank. And I would just stick with the 0.1% solution. And what you'll do is you'll take the whatever your tank capacity is. I would take the tank capacity and subtract 10%, like normal, because you figure 10% away. So if you got a 3,000 gallon tank, subtract 10%, you got 2,700. Take the 2,700 and multiply it by 0.001 for a 0.1% solution, and it will tell you how many gallons of foam solution or concentrate you need. Let's think about this a minute. And also, in order to really get a good mix, what do we typically do? At least I was always taught, and I will still do it, although I have to really pay attention to it, is recirculating, because you don't have an adductor, you don't have a calf system, so you recirculate to try to get that foam solution to the right consistency or texture, if you will, so that when it comes out, it does its job. So here's
we were taught the same thing.
Okay, so when we do this, if we've overmixed the foam, we just made it that much easier to super concentrate this, or super expand, I should say, is probably the right word. Super expand the foam so that it's now starting to take up so much surface volume that it's creating such a large air pocket to where the pump can no longer allow the water to come in.
Now, one of the tactics that we were taught, at least on the East Coast, was again, like we were talking about the circulation of the tank.
Yep.
So going back to the Type 6 scenario, the engineer that was taught to regulate the pressure. First of all, when we loaded up, he circulated the tank because you wanted to mix the foam, and then one of the tricks that we used here was to, instead of throttling down and to keep pressure up, because whatever oil flows in, and he's running probably about a 400 or 500 foot hose leg to the folks mopping up the fire. And it was 1.5 inch hose leg, but he was opening, instead of reducing the pressure or working with an nozzleman to properly use the bail pressure and items like that. He was just hitting the recirculation valve every time. So he was constantly recirculating all that foam over and over again, and then like you said, oh wait, I'm not getting any pressure anymore. I'm going to rev, and so he closed the valves, but then he revved up the pump, and that's when we had the pump failure.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, back in this day in the 90s, that probably had actual packing as opposed to a mechanical seal, huh?
I don't know. This was in the 90s. This is 2013 or 2014.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
on that one.
This was a recent incident. Yeah.
Well, it's
and the engineer and both engineers had about 7-8 years under their belt, and they got caught off guard by it.
That's pretty amazing. Absolutely pretty amazing. So the big question now is, what have you guys done to try to mitigate that?
Well, in the
meaning that event,
world,
to mitigate that event from happening again.
Yeah, well, I know in the structural fire world, the company that was involved and the neighboring companies, that's when they went ahead and started looking at bringing back the foam inductors, and they get the what I call again the foam purses, and that seemed to have mitigated that problem. In the Wildland world, it was again like anything else, we do a after action review, what happened, what could we do better next time. And we went ahead and did trying to do mass education, and still part of it now is our fleet chiefs at the time went and did an inspection on all the fire apparatus, found all the 5-gallon jugs, took them all off, and gave everybody 2 little Gatorade bottles, and that's as much foam as they were allowed to carry. And if they needed them filled, they had to go back. They had to go back to headquarters to get it filled, because that way it prevented them from doing more than they needed. So.
Wow. That almost, in a way, that almost seems kind of extreme. Now, when you say a Gatorade jug, I mean, are we talking about a gallon of Gatorade or half gallon or?
No, we're talking the single quart to even the little baby ones. That was what some folks were given.
Wow.
So we're talking, it's again the Wildland community. A GSA bottle, a GSA canteen or 2 was left on the truck of foam, and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, and So again, this mass education is a little, half of it, if it was a 250-gallon tank, you would probably pour about half of that quart, in there, and it normally would get you through either a good heavy initial attack, or you could be mopping up all day on just that half a quart. So that seemed to mitigate it for the time being.
But you said that you guys are going back to the eductors. Now, are these built-in eductors to the apparatus, or are these the portable ones that you just drop into the 5-gallon pail on the side of the truck?
No, we don't even use them anymore. It's again those magical foam purses with you tie it directly into the 1 3/4 or 1 1/2 line,
Okay.
and you put the foam mix in the purse, and then there's like a little nozzle at the end of it.
Yep.
I'll try to see if I can send a picture to you, and it's pretty nifty.
Yeah, you go ahead and do that, and when that arrives, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add it into this section of the video so that way folks can see what it is. So let's switch gears a little bit. What's going on in Jersey City?
So we went to Jersey City recently because the state of New Jersey is trying to come up with a standard not only for structural firefighters to participate in a WUI situation, and as you know, we have the fires in the Meadowlands and everything else.
Okay.
And they're part of the New Jersey Forest Fire, the secondary response area. So that's normally because unlike the rest of the state of New Jersey, and as you said earlier this week in Recon where I live, we're pretty rural up here, but down in the metro city, it's all paid and career fire departments. So they're not used to having full-on wildland suppression, so they're, again, more the metro area.
Okay.
So we went down there, and we were trying to, basically it was just like a little confab on if they're involved in wildland suppression, what should be the bare minimum training, and of course they don't want to do the 130, 190, they just want to have the, hey, how do we go out in the woods and just smash, for the 3 acres in our town, how do we smash the fire out? And, just a little talk, and I met a chief out there, and he was telling me about when the water system fails in Jersey City, how they have to figure stuff out for the water supply. And it's such a foreign concept that water tenders coming in to support the city. And he did his quick math on his head, and he goes, on his first due assignment, they have row houses in Jersey City. And, it's a typical, like, again, if those listening, it's a typical row houses, they're one right to the other, and he goes, if you call for one, there's only 3 fully burned when you get there. So on the first due assignment, those 2 engines will have at least up to 4 to 6 lines in service when they arrive at the incident. And his math, they don't have a water supply from a hydrant system, in order for him to effectively suppress a structural fire of those magnitudes, he would need 15 tenders within the first 10 minutes of an incident.
Well, if he's got 15 tenders and they're 3,000-gallon tenders, that's 45,000 gallons of water.
Yes.
So it's literally, now what causes the system to fail out there in Jersey City? Don't they have a really good system?
Well, again, depends on where you're at. They have a water main break, or during our disasters that we've had occur over the last few years on the East Coast with the hurricanes Irene and Lee and Superstorm Sandy, between flooding, the systems get overwhelmed and they're not able to keep up with it. So the hydrant systems go down. And again, you want to see, again, our brother firemen, we all have our different skills. I'm not running to a high rise, but I'll run to the mountains, no problem, to go dig handline anywhere. But when we went down to these areas to help do water supply for them, we arrived, with our tenders empty because, again, during these disasters we were trying to get through and we didn't want to have any, extra travel time. And they freaked out because, hey, you're here with no water. So we set up a portable pump and fill our tenders that way. And they're like, oh, we never thought about that. And the thought of drafting and doing tender operations in a metro area it is a educational experience when we go out and teach these metro area departments this, because they're so used to, in 400 feet there's another plot.
Let's just start daisy chaining some porta tanks, snap tanks, and start going in there and set up a fill site and make it a one-way loop and just make it non-stop. That never even enters their mind then, huh?
No, it really doesn't. Again, it's the metro system where they're taught that you tag a hydrant and there's a secondary hydrant to hop onto. It's not really again they're not really taught drafting. And again, maybe some of the metro areas they are, but I know in my experience working with them, it's not a practical skill. It's not a common skill to go, hey, we're going to go down to the harbor today and we're going to draft out of the river and we're going to pump water through our engine. It's what's a suction line? They don't do that.
Wow.
So they're so real. So it's
so then does that
urban
mean,
areas?
no, go ahead and finish.
So it's such a problem in New Jersey. They've recognized it that again, we're slowly realizing the tender is an important key aspect of any fire organization. So the state got a grant, and I think every county has been issued additional water tenders just for this purpose of, hey, if there's a major event in the metro area, these county tenders can head down there and staff and help run water supply.
Well, instead of me interjecting, why don't you tell me what do you think is causing this to be this way today?
With the current, like how we're the different tactics,
well, the reason why we have to basically, it seems like we have to start over and re-educate as to why we're having to sit here and focus on the tactics of water in sufficient quantity to match BTU. I would have thought that this would have been like old hat for everybody out there. It almost seems like they learned it and then got away from it and are now and forgot it and then have to come back to it. Is that what's going on here?
I'm going to go with that because I know when I came in the fire service, we had a lot of the old school fire chiefs. The good mentors that they had to they still did the flow calculations. They still figured out how much water they needed, and I think what a lot of that happened was it's the education requirement where you took a lot. Again, I'm all for education. I'm all for going to trade schools, go to college. Whatever you can do to get more education. Whatever you got to do, go do it.
Right.
But I think what happened was on the East Coast here, firefighting's tradition, and just like it is anywhere else in the country, but it's very, very traditional here, and it's the way we've always done it. But I think the thing is, like, people go to these, go to fire academies, and they're taught the basics, and they're shot through an academy, whether volunteer or career, they're shot through it in a short period of time, and they're not getting the reinforcement from the older generation, from the chauffeur or engineer that's been there for 30 years. Hey, kid, come here. I'm going to show you how to run the pump today. They're not getting that anymore. And I think a lot of that has been lost. And I see that almost every day in my regular job, where you're seeing hey, here's a trainee. He just came on 3 or 4 years ago. Now he's running an engine. Granted, I'm all for that. Don't get me wrong, but you go up to him and you're asking how much water are you going to need to suppress a 5-acre fire, or what are you going to need for a building fire here? I'll just call a second alarm in, 3 ladders, 2 tenders, and I'm like, well, how are you going to keep that water flow up? And they don't really, nobody's learning that stuff. Nobody's really educating.
Now there is the key that I have always talked to people. I got this term from my mentor, Brent Palmer, who was infrastructure. If you don't set up your infrastructure while you're en route, you're going to fall on your face.
Yeah, no, I 110% agree. Because again, it's something. Again, I learned the hard way as when I was coming to the ranks. Hey, I can have all the cool engines and ladder trucks and rescues in the world, and I got one water tender. How effective am I going to be on that fire? That's so. If you're not, like you said, like your mentor was saying, if you don't build that infrastructure, how are you really gonna be effective at that incident?
And so
going back to what you were just saying there, as an IC, again, I've had to use that tactic. Again, I go with the ICFs and stuff like that, but it's basically the water supply officer. I make a water supply group, because the group is functional, and I turn to someone. I go, "Your water supply group. You find the draft sites, you get me tenders, and you keep water flowing to me." And I make that announcement on the tactical Fireground, and everybody works with the water supply officer or the water supply group supervisor to get the job done. And it takes so much off me to not have to worry about that stuff. And I know when I came out and was in brief, they said, don't worry about your water supply. Joe will take care of that for you. And that was like, thank God, it's one less thing I got to worry about when I'm in an area that I'm not familiar with.
Well, it's funny because when Kelly, I'm not going to mention her last name, but she's with Helitac, and when she came up, one of our guys was talking to her about it, and she said the same thing because she's so used to having to think about it. Because let's face it, no matter where you go, 90% of the time, Jersey, the people that do the job that I do, they don't think about it unless they're told to go get water.
Yeah.
They don't do it. Me, I kind of look at it, well, it's kind of stupid and pointless. If I'm a water tender and I see that these engines are using up water, the helicopters are using up water, I've dumped my tank into that thing, well, I'm just going to sit here on my duff and wait for somebody to tell me to go fill up my tank again. That's pretty pathetic in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I just recently did some teaching with some of the local VFDs, and we were talking. I don't want to say teaching. We were having a coffee table discussion, and it was the
copy that.
As your initial attack, I see it was there's several things again. The structural world, and I said the Wildland world again. We have the REM now, the Rapid Extrication Module. It's a Wildland version of the RIC. But I'm like, you get on scene, you do your size up, you quickly do your quick tickler list for resources, and I go. You got to set up, you got to set up someone to do status check and recorder, the accountability officer now, because that's becoming a weak area in our part of the country, which we're trying to get back up on that. Water supply, you got to set the water supply group and have that supervisor figure out what's my primary water supply, what's my secondary water supply, just in case one fails, and how we get in the water of the incident. And the last, of course, is your rapid intervention. How am I going to get if someone gets hurt? How am I getting out of here? So.
Well,
but everybody forgets. But everybody forgets about water supply. That seems to be the number one. Like, oh yeah, I got my ladders, I got my second alarm. Where are you getting your water? Oh crap, I didn't think about that.
But what is common sense to me is not common for somebody else. So I have a tremendous amount of patience and leeway to help somebody that doesn't know, especially if they come and say, I've never done this before. What do we do? How do we do this? And I will definitely take the time, and I've done this on incidents, take the time to lay out what's going on, why we're doing this a certain way. Case in point, probably about 3 years ago, we had a fire, oh God, I can't remember where it was. I think it was called the Bob Fire. And it was down in through a valley area. You go down towards Austin in our neck of the woods, you hang a right, you go out 50, and then 20 miles or 30 miles, whatever it is, Jersey, and then you make another right and you come back up a valley. Well, the far north end of the valley is at the north end of a big pivot field. So you go up over the hill, and here's this mountain and everything kind of burning up and doing its thing. Well, what I had done was something that made perfect sense to me, because again, it goes back to the time of mitigate risk, thinking of ways to mitigate risk and increase efficiency and speed. So what did I do? The pumpkins that we had set up for helicopters, I plumbed them all together with 2.5-inch hose and some 2.5-inch gated Ys. Back this tender away a safe distance, so that way you don't have to sit here and constantly keep worrying about backing a tender up and using the bulk dump and timing that in between the time that he's coming in with a bucket. Because at some point, what happens is that somebody either falls into the pumpkin, and now they're sopping wet, now you got to get out of the damn thing, or you slip, you run the risk of slipping and falling and injuring yourself. That's a big problem. Or you start to drip so much water that now you can get the tender stuck, and then the helicopter can't safely draft. So I was looking at all these things going, we are setting ourselves up for such a liability, a risk, and the longer we do it, the greater it is. So I was like, oh, screw this. I'm just going to plumb it all together and run it off of a discharge. And so we just had tenders make a continuous nonstop loop. They would hook up to my tender or whatever and pump and fill me, and then I would just keep so I never moved, but other tenders were feeding me.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have similar situations here in Jersey. Not with the helicopters, but of course out west, everything's, they want to do aircraft and everything, but especially with grass sites in the structural world and even some wildland sites, you have that issue where they've been dumping for all day. If it's wintertime, they've iced up everything, and now they can't gain access to the water supply site. Or they're in the, we're in the farmer's field somewhere staged up, and they mucked it. Now all of a sudden I got 3 tenders bogged down, and I've lost my water flow because I've lost my water supply because we got to go get them pulled out. And unfortunately, I'm gonna take your what you did trick there. I'm gonna pass it along to some of the chiefs I know and say, hey, why don't we start trying to do this, for water supply.
Yeah, in fact, I've even got some pictures. In fact, that fire, I can. I've got pictures on my computer. I can send it to you as soon as we're done here. But so no recapping. So we're an hour and 5 minutes into this, but recapping, Jersey. I think we're probably at a consensus that batch mixing foam is still not a problem. I do not get concerned about it. It doesn't freak me out. You're not going to damage or destroy anything as long as you keep the concentration down low and you're not trying to pull to capacity of the pump from the tank. So if there's something that what I'm doing here, that this guy, this chief in Jersey City, can look at and go, oh, hey, this makes sense. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Great, more power to him. Which, by the way, I did mail off that booklet to him today. So
awesome.
It will leave tomorrow, and so I would say that probably by the end of the week, maybe Saturday. I don't know how your guys' mail system. It's U.S. mail. So he should definitely have it, and I sent it to the address that you gave me.
Awesome.
Anything else that you want to talk about before we push the stop button here, Jersey?
No, it's about almost 11:15 my time here, and my phone battery's about down to 2%, so I'm good for the evening.
All righty. Well, thanks a lot, and until next time, you have a good evening, Jersey, and it was a pleasure to talk with you.
All right, take care. I'll talk to you later, Doc Hydro.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty, there you go, guys. Jersey from Branchville, New Jersey.